Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Lou Biscotti, National Food and Beverage Practice Leader for Markham LLP. I am delighted to welcome everyone to Markham's third webinar focused on the coronavirus's impact on food and beverage companies. And we have two more coming up on May 27th and June 4th. I am particularly pleased to be partnering today with our good friends Kilpatrick Townsend, Focal Point, and Brian Todd as our moderator. A thank you to our food and beverage team of 90 professionals serving our 500 food and beverage clients throughout the U.S., and especially to Markham's managing partner of Northern California, a speaker for today, Jeff Pera. Please take a moment to review the excellent resources on our website addressing recent legislation due to COVID, which was provided by our coronavirus task force. You know the tagline by now. If you have a question, ask Markham. And now please meet Brian Todd, founder of Brian Todd and Associates.
Thank you, Lou, and welcome everyone. The food industry nearly past 4 decades, nothing compares to the impact COVID-19 has had on the food supply chain in such a concentrated period. While there have certainly been many challenges and more to come, I think it's important for everyone here to note that food producers, distributors, and retailers, be they grocery stores or restaurants, have quickly shifted gears and expedited innovation to keep stores open and grocery carts filled, maybe not with toilet paper, with a plethora of other products. Today, we're very happy to have 3 excellent speakers here today, and I'll give a brief introduction and then I will turn it over to the presenters. Mike Schall will kick us off today. He's been with Focal Point's food and beverage practice since earlier this year and follows a decade as an advisor and then senior principal of global growth and business development at Whole Foods Market, where he provided leadership and on investments and acquisitions, new ventures, and strategic partnerships. Additionally, Mike has served on boards held various C-level positions in food companies ranging from Fresh Food Concepts to Monterey Gourmet Foods, the Wise Foods, and the B. Manischewitz Company. He's also been involved in numerous capital raising and mergers and acquisitions as either part of the acquiring entity or the seller. He's also a graduate of USC's Marshall School of Business and has authored numerous food industry articles and blogs. Today, Mike will be looking at the supply chain, which has pretty much been turned upside down in many instances by this pandemic. Just one example of how much is Walmart's announcement yesterday that said its U.S. inventory declined 6% in the first quarter. And of course, that's food products are only one portion of that. So I'm sure if that number of food inventory would be out of stocks would be significantly higher than that. And as they are the nation's largest food retailer, they'll be preparing for the future. But looking forward to what Mike can fill us in on today. Following Mike will be Jeff Pera, who's a managing partner at the Northern California region for Markham. And he has more than 25 years of experience providing tax, business, and industry advice to clients. He uses his in-depth knowledge as the basis for developing and applying tax and value-added business strategies to his clients. He has expertise in a number of areas, but particularly food and beverage distribution and retail, which all will come in handy in the foreseeable future. Jeff holds a Master of Science in Taxation from Golden Gate University and a Bachelor of Science and degree from San Diego University, showing that he's a real California guy. He's been published in numerous trade journals and is a frequent presenter at industry events. Mike will be looking at the CARES Act, but a lot of the press very recently has been reporting on that, but mostly on the Payroll Protection Loan Program. But there's a lot more to it than the PPP. So Jeff will look at the various opportunities and perhaps some challenges in tax planning because of the act. And as we all know, it's never too early to start planning for taxes or tax incentives. And then closing us out today will be Baba Kusha, who's a partner at Kilpatrick Townsend's intellectual property practice. And he also serves as co-chair of the multidiscipline retail and consumer group. Babak focuses on patent prosecution and counseling with special emphasis in the food and beverage and consumer areas. He helps clients evaluate IP risks, implement carefully calculated IP plans, and strategize the use of IP. He counsels clients on various aspects of intellectual property law, patentability, opinions, invention identification, and assessments. He also worked his 12 years as an engineer. And more recently, as one of the most innovative areas in the food industry has been in alternative proteins, which he'll address today in a lot more detail. But new processes have expanded alternative proteins, particularly in the meat business, which is a $1.4 trillion global market. Beyond Meat is just one of the players out there, and certainly the pandemic has allowed them to expand greatly in the grocery section. And as the restaurant industry reopens, more likely on that side, it will expand as well. But they're not the only player out there, as Nestle, Kellogg, and Tyson have also entered the fray. So stay tuned for much more on this burgeoning sector from Babak. But for now, I'd like to turn it over to Mike, who will kick us off. And just a reminder before Mike begins that please submit any of your Q&A using the Q&A tab on your machine, and we will address them at the end of the presentations. So the floor is yours, Mike.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And I do want to acknowledge and thank our hosts and co-sponsors, Kilpatrick, Townsend, and Markham, and welcome everybody this morning. As everybody has characterized the industry, it is in a rapid state of change, and I'd like to drop two words from our vocabulary, if I could. One is unprecedented, and the other is stark, because those are evidence of we've experienced in our lifetime. So they become generic. In terms of my experience, I just want to acknowledge this 40 years of unique industry perspective as an operator on a lot of different businesses, and then really having this privilege of being a merchant retailer for the last 10 at Whole Foods, Amazon, and it has given me a very, very unique lens into the industry. And because of all the changes now, I think we are looking to, and I personally am looking to writing the next chapter in what is a most unusual and stimulating and innovative time in the modern era. Let me dive right into the current situation. And I think everybody's looking at basically a 4-box slide here. It's pretty simple, and this is not news, the immense and colossal disruption of the supply chain. And it's not just, the tractor trailers going from the manufacturing plants, obviously, to the back of the store. This has impacted commodities and raw material, global procurement, prioritization of co-manufacturing production, SKU rationalization, and obviously intense demand planning at every level to deliver products to the shelf. And this is particularly challenging because it wasn't too many years ago that inventories, or what was known as the back room in supermarket retailers, was being mitigated to expand and save working capital. So what we used to know in retail, known as order to shelf, and who would have known that efficiency would have come back to really challenge us. So this entire supply chain of value creation mechanisms has been really just entirely upended. The center store, everyone knows and has heard, I don't need to quote the stats, the Tin Can Alley, whether that be the literal can and Combi Block and Tetra Pak or frozen products, have been dramatically altered. Consumers are cooking. They're learning how to cook. They're taking roughly $200 billion out of the food service market and bringing it back into their kitchens. And as a result of that, what I call this barbell effect is kind of running from or running to categories. Running from categories that are perceived as having some risk and volatility and food safety, and running to categories. And I think the example we've all noted and are intrigued with is plant-based alternatives, not just for meat, by the way. Retailers remain very keenly interested in supporting smaller brands, albeit they're prioritizing. Many of those in the audience have probably had the impact of their category review schedules being changed and or pushed back, or SKUs being discontinued, promotions and merchandising activity being challenged by virtue of the fact that the customer is telling us what they want and where they want it. And then finally, e-commerce. We're entering a whole new world order in e-commerce, which was once just the domain of basic product. We're seeing demand from a range of areas within the consumer. Raising capital and valuation drivers. I know everybody is interested in this, and I think the answer is, and it was pre-COVID and continues, as there is a tremendous amount of dry powder, but that dry powder is being applied much more selectively. The idea and strategy of gaining market entry among investors is being more scrutinized. Things like efficiencies and enhancing gross margin from early stage to scalable business is far more important than it was with a longer timeline for folks that wanted to be more patient with investing. As scarce a resource as cash is, and my colleague Bob Woolway and I have been on at least almost 200 calls with firms over the last several weeks, we're seeing an interest in minority equity raises. We're looking at companies that are seeking capital with great business plans that continue to be attracted to those unique sources of capital where they may not have considered that in the past. There's style points for creativity, but the key is these leverageable value creators. Discounts in the market, of course. Discounts not only to mitigate their risk and relever their businesses because they just simply can. They can be more selective because they own the precious commodities. But it stands to reason that category velocities, household penetration of products and new businesses, new brands, and margins and mitigating selling expense are very important. I want to mention also that the roles that categories and products play within retailers is very important. So on an axis where you may have the importance to the customer and importance to the retailer, on those X and Y axes, there's a typical quadrant that manufacturers and marketers and retailers are seeking. And whether that be what's called a destination category, which is a must-have distinguisher for retailers, or a maintain and convenience category on the bottom half of that quadrant, those are aspects of brands and retailers that are choosing to be more selective. Moving on, in terms of the criteria for success, I'd like to just say, and most people would agree, that people buy food because it tastes good principally, but it satisfies and assuages, and now food as RX, food as prescription, food as medicine is going to play a much greater role in the future post-COVID. And I think we're going to see a tremendous amount of innovation around that area. And once again, particularly in plant-based foods. The products and manufacturers, early stage existing, will need to satisfy a need specifically, whether it's an alternative, a better product, or what I call a day part experience. So with many more people being home and seeking breakfast day part, for example, we see some opportunities in the breakfast area. Retailers and supply chains are focused on the basics of SKU rationalization, making certain the right sizes and flavors are on the shelf in lieu of what would have usually been an assortment or a display is very impactful right now. And we'll see a rebound to normalcy, I think, in the next 6 months. But right now, for companies that are seeking investments and companies that are looking to add to their resources, it's as they say, it's not sell in, but it's sell through. And then finally, at the end of the day, I think the key takeaways here are are twofold, or threefold rather, excuse me. Investors are still seeking opportunities. There's no question that Bob and I in our food and beverage practice have seen just an immense amount of activity in this space. Quality deal flow is still there, co-manufacturing, the TIC sector, which is testing, inspection, and certification, and food safety, anything that has to do with understanding the difference between a bacteria and a virus, and alternative proteins and plant-based foods remains extremely attractive. And I think new transactions or pipeline will want to mitigate leverage. Cash really king, and whether that's in the form of a minority equity stake and or other types of vehicles that mitigate the risk and leverage from folks that are looking to play a role in food going forward are going to be critical. With that, I would just want to thank our hosts and my colleague Bob Woolway at Focal Point Partners with that as a conclusion. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. And again, please submit your questions, and we will tally them all up at the end of the presentations. But right now, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff Pera from Markham, who'll look at it more from the accounting standpoint. All yours, Jeff.
Great. Thank you so much, and welcome everybody, and thanks for joining our call today. Really excited about being able to provide you with some information as it relates to what the CARES Act has provided food and beverage companies in general, manufacturers, distributors, and retailers in the food and beverage space. And so let's get right to it. So some of these things will be somewhat detailed or esoteric, but what I'll try and do is give you some of the rules, but then also on top of that, layer on top of that, the opportunities that these types of rules will present for you. So the first is net operating losses. It was just a couple years ago that Trump passed his Tax Act, which eliminated carrybacks of net operating losses. So if you had a loss in a year, in 2018 or 2019, you couldn't carry it back to a prior year. You could only carry it forward to the next 20 years. Well, the CARES Act has substantially changed that and allowed any losses that you have had in 2018, which you've probably already filed a return for, or the current year 2019, for which the filing is taking place right now in 2020, those losses can be carried back 5 years. So that's a significant amount of change, and where the laws only allowed you to take back 80% of your taxable income, you can now take 100% of your loss back. Now, when does this provide a huge benefit? If in 2018 or 2019 you were ostensibly taxed at a 21% rate and created a loss in those years because of some future things that I'll be going over in a few minutes, you can now carry them back to the prior years where you were paying a 35% tax rate. So you've really converted 21% dollars into 35% dollars, which creates a much larger refund. And I think in the next few slides it'll come out as to how that might happen for you. So going on to the next slide here, we're going to talk about some of the interest expense limitations. So this is an area where if you have revenue, gross receipts of greater than $25 million, there's an interest expense limitation that applies, where you could only have interest expense deductible up to 30% of a limited amount called the adjusted taxable income. And while I won't go into that amount or how that's calculated, the important takeaway is rather than 30% of your income, it has been raised to 50% of your income. So this allows corporations and partnerships to increase their interest expense deduction in the years of 2019 and 2020 for corporations, and 2019 and 2020 for partnerships. So it's a significant increase in the amount of deduction that can be taken. So if you were limited as to how much interest expense that you could take, now all of a sudden that interest expense limitation has been increased by 20 basis points. So there's a significant amount of opportunity there. And if that created a net operating loss, going back to that first slide, you can carry that loss back, as I said, 5 years and free up taxable income and taxes paid in those prior years, which creates some refunds. I'll give you some examples of where that applied in a real case example here in a minute. Going on to the next slide, we've got what's called qualified improvement property, and this is a significant benefit, I think, to most food and beverage manufacturers, restaurants, retailers, people who are, or companies who are making improvements in their space. It could be improvements for new ceilings, new internal doors, new electrical, new scanning equipment, for instance, new plumbing or fixtures, HVAC, for instance, security systems, things on the interior of a premises where you are retailing or preparing food, for instance, or distributing or manufacturing food and beverage. These are the types of improvements that up until the CARES Act, I should really say, was considered 39-year life. And that meant you'd have to capitalize those improvements and depreciate them over 39 years, a significantly long period of time over which to retain that benefit back to you. Now, under the CARES Act, they've considered that property, those types of improvements, as qualified improvement property, which means instead of a 39-year life, it's now a 15-year life. What does that mean? That means because it's 15-year life, you can take what's called bonus depreciation or immediate expensing. So if you had $1 million of improvements that you made in 2019, for instance, instead of capitalizing that and depreciating it over 39 years, you can take an immediate deduction. And if that immediate deduction, going back to that first slide of NOLs, created a net operating loss for you, you could file a NOL carryback to 5 years prior and generate a significant amount of cashback refund. Many of our clients have been doing this. We've got a few restaurant chains that had made significant improvements in 2018 and 2019, and we amended the 2018 returns, carried those 2018 dollars back to 2014, freed up significant amount of refunds. I'm talking hundreds of thousands of dollars that were paid in those prior years, and they now all of a sudden have refund checks to help fund continued operations for pickup and delivery as the case may be. So there's a significant amount of opportunity there. So when you look at and talk to your accountant, and if you don't have one, as Lou said off the bat, ask Markham, because we can help you with this. We can categorize your improvements and look at whether or not they qualified as qualified improvement property, and thereby take advantage of some of these opportunities for carryback claims. Moving on to the next slide, another significant opportunity that a lot of food and beverage companies don't necessarily look at or take advantage of. It's research and development tax credits are usually those things that people associate with technology type companies or companies that are innovating. Well, innovating and innovation isn't limited to technology companies. You can have food and beverage companies also taking advantage of innovation, and we've seen many of those opportunities and innovations taking place right now, whether it's plant-based proteins through Beyond Meat or Impossible Foods or some of the other companies in the plant-based cheese area. There's a lot of innovation taking place, even in CBD type beverages, where CBD is infused into various products to enhance the outcome of what they're trying to develop. Those types of activities will actually qualify for research and development tax credits. And if you were to look at how much benefit you would normally get, there's two types of benefits. If you had less than $5 million of gross receipts and you were a C Corp, you could offset as much as $250,000 of payroll FICA credits. So even though you're not making a lot of money, and to take advantage of a research and development tax credit, which would otherwise offset taxable income, you can use those credits that you generate to offset FICA taxes. So it's a way of funding payroll without having to actually take the credit against taxable income. If you have more than $5 million of gross receipts, You can look at some of the examples here where we've got under food, processes, and packaging and sustainability. These types of activities will actually qualify for research and development tax credits, whether it's the FICA R&D tax credit or whether it's the income tax credit. Either way, there's substantial benefit that is available to you as companies to qualify for these research development tax credits. The biggest thing in these areas is making sure that we are documenting those activities and documenting the costs associated with those activities. If we can do those types of things and we can capture them, then we will be able to take advantage of those credits for you and substantially reduce your out-of-pocket funding as it relates to the activities that generate those types of innovation and activities that generate the kind of products you're trying to develop. The biggest thing that I would say that companies should really focus on is really going back to, I'll just go back to this qualified improvement property. These are the types of things that as companies have tried to innovate the premises upon which they're trying to sell products, whether you're a fast food delivery, whether you're a restaurant, whether you're a retailer, whether you're a distributor, whether you're a supermarket or a grocery store selling product out of your store and you've made improvements, this is a big dollar item that can really substantially help you. And I'll leave you with this. Marcum has a significant amount of CARES Act and COVID-19 response items on its webpage. I would encourage all of you to, if you have more interest on the PPP or the SBA loan or the payroll credits, things of that sort that have direct result of the COVID response, to go to the Marcum webpage where we have a significant amount of literature and even webinars that you can tap into to get more information. With that, I'll turn it over to Babak.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for that excellent presentation. I was taking tons and tons of notes for the clients that we serve, especially the portion on the R&D tax credit. I think it's a very, very useful piece of information to have. I also like to thank Mike for his excellent presentation and also the Marcum and Focal Point for making this joint effort possible. When we're looking at this portion of the program, that's my focus, which is the food supply chain and innovations and how alternative proteins fit into that, I always start to think about two questions that most attorneys start asking. It's the what and the why. So before we can get into the what and the why, we need to understand the background here that we're looking at this food system. We have a food system that's heavily disrupted right now, and we're trying to understand why, and then we're trying to come up with some solutions, and those are the solutions that are going to address the problem. And the ones that can align themselves in a way to be successful in the long term are the ones that are going to be able to maintain and stay. Moving on to some of the basics as to why we are here in the alternative protein space. What are the motivations? When we're looking at the alternative proteins before the pandemic hit, there was lots of factors that were driving it. Of course, there were the health benefits, there were the humane arguments, we had the environmental concerns, and then, of course, there's a big sustainability question of the calories that we may need to feed about 7 billion people. So there was lots of motivations, and those whys were driving the movement for this almost disruptive technology. In a way, we are disruptive, the food supply. We were able to put plant-based products in the meat shelves in grocery stores, and we were able to get almond milk and all kinds of other plant-based beverages there in the dairy portion. So it was a disruptive environment, but now we have this pandemic. So what can we expect? Can we expect ourselves to return to this normal? It doesn't seem to be anymore. And the motivations that we had before we got here that drove this alternative protein market, they are there. They're all there. Plus, we have tons more reasons. And the ones that are able to pivot in this environment and understand what's going on and how to approach it are able to be successful. So why are we seeing this rise in this demand for the alternative proteins? And why are we seeing these challenges to the meats and challenges to the beef and dairy? And the question is it necessarily sustainable? Is meat sustainable? What we're saying now, the terms that Mike said we're not going to use, is this unprecedented time. I agree. It seems like in about a week's worth of time, this term has been so abused that we don't even want to hear it anymore. But what we do know is that the meat supply chain and our vegetable supply chain and dairy supply chains are massively disrupted. And if you really pull back and try to understand why things like that are happening, I attended a presentation last night from my old University of Wisconsin people, and they were talking about dairy and they were talking about meat, and they're concerned. So when you look at the problem, it seems like at one hand, we have a massive shortage in the grocery stores. On the other hand, we have a massive glut on the supply side. And it seems like we're throwing away a lot of food that should not be thrown away. There's a tremendous amount of waste. And all of this is a concern. It seems like suppliers are not happy about it, and neither are the grocery stores. So maybe it's this overly concentrated consolidation of meat processing and dairy processing facilities are what causing us these kinds of problems. So no, the supply chain is not massively broken, but we have a very, very efficient supply chain that's set up to deliver food very inefficiently very efficiently and very inexpensively. But at the same time now, where we're facing this current pandemic, the supply chain, those large processing facilities are facing issues. They're shut down. They can't be operating. So we have to come up with different ways of dealing with this stuff. So packaging is important. How the food is packaged, how the food is delivered, how the food is consumed, how the food is stored. All of those things that impact the supply chain are ways that we need to really think about innovating in those areas. In a way, we almost need to set up a situation where we have a railroad switch, a switch that we can throw next time that we face a situation that we have a massive disruption. We had them before when we had earthquakes and tsunamis. We have them now with this massive pandemic. Chances are we will have them in the future. So we need to be able to innovate to be able to get out of these kinds of situations and have our business thrive. So when we think about that, we need to be innovating in the way that the whole supply system is done. How do we get items on the store shelves? How do we buy food? How do we prepare food? How do we deliver food? How do we monitor every one of these steps? You heard Mike talk about, testing, packaging, delivery, e-commerce, all of those aspects. At the same time, we need to be thinking about sustainability. We need to be thinking about the survival of this process on a large-scale basis. On a macro scale, what we're seeing is restaurants have shifted to delivery because the massive amount of food that was going to those purveyors is now coming to our homes, as Mike was talking about. At the same time, we're seeing grocery stores are shelved with items that are never been sold before. I pick up items I've never seen before. And then at the same time, there's a need for comfort food. So do we see a need for foods of that sort? Do we shift for more packaging? It seems like for a while, things were all shifting towards lack of packaging and sustainable and none of that. Now, if I need to go buy a small piece of pastry, it's already prepackaged. So do we need to see innovations in terms of packaging? Are we seeing a shift away from meat? It seems like there's a shortage. It seems like the reasons that we had for that area are now amplified. At the same time, cash flow is a concern. Profit margins are going down. That's what we're seeing. So money is tight. We have the impact of that. So again, more affordable food becomes a favorite item. We know that for the meat business, from what we are hearing, for them to be back up to full speed, cost of meat perhaps is going to go up for the added safety features and all the things we need to do for the CDC guidelines or what have you. So that increase in the price of meat may be the opportunity for others to go in there and capitalize on that market. When we're thinking of innovation in the food area and all this kind of somewhat negative news in the last few weeks, we know such quotes from Larissa Zimbroff in Bloomberg. This was May 1, 2020. It seems like it's a while ago, but we know that the plant-based vegetarian is a growth opportunity. Retail food market grew about 2% overall, whereas we've seen 11% in the plant-based. So it's not just the meat. All of these big players, Tyson, Smithfield, Hormel, they're all in the plant-based area. Meanwhile, we know that China is heavily into it. I think I read this morning that their alternative plant-based pork product is taken over is massively and is growing massively. So everyone's kind of into this area, and there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to innovate in this plant-based space. When we get into the plant-based space, some of the things that we run into is this labeling laws. And basically, it's a political economy situation. We have people who want to get their product out there, and they feel that they should be free to call it what they want to. And then there are players that feel that the labeling laws should be such that you should get a product that you expect to receive. So we have some states, Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, they have filed lawsuits to try to control labeling laws. And then, of course, we know that we have laws in this land that says that you cannot go off and control speech. And when government gets involved in trying to regulate speech, it has to meet a very, very high level of scrutiny. And so we're seeing how those things are playing out. Of course, almond milk and oat milk and things of that sort are successful, and no one seems to be confused as to what it is that they're buying. So hopefully the same will continue. So when we're thinking of building a strong brand, really, you should be thinking about a good name, and at the same time, it should be part of your overall strategy: trademarks, copyrights, design patents, and utility patents. And then when we're thinking about innovation, you should really be thinking about, at the same time, what are the reasons to go off and protect these things? At a very, very, very high level, we want to get patents for our secret sauce. We want to get patents to make sure that if an employee of ours leaves and goes somewhere else, so that technology doesn't leave with that person. And at the same time, here's all the other reasons that we can enumerate: stopping competitors and things of that sort. We can read the list. I think we're kind of getting towards the end of our time, and before we go away, I'd like to ask us a couple of questions. And so, if you could, please let me know how you stand with regards to innovations. And these are the three questions. So if you could please respond for us, which one of these categories better defines where you stand now in terms of your activities with respect to innovations that you have done for COVID-19. And I look forward to getting your answers to these. I give us a few seconds to hear back. Those are our polling questions.
Babak, while they're submitting their responses, the one thing I would say in terms of the packaging and the sustainability of new food items, as well as how new food items are going to have to be on the shelves in terms of the packaging to prevent what otherwise might be perceived as a risk item, those are the types of innovative activities that will qualify for the research and development tax credit, which would then help offset the cost of that innovation itself.
That's tremendous. That's tremendous. I'd like to follow up with you on that afterwards and share that. Very good. Well, we have the results. It looks like a majority of people we have 40% of people who are in category B, as we see, and we have about 40% that are in C, and we have about 20% of us who are beginning to think about it. This is very useful. This is enlightening for us, and I will now stop and turn it over for questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Babak, and thank you all for some outstanding presentations. Again, for any questions that are out there, please submit them using the Q&A tab on your screen there. We do have a few already. Also like to just mention that the session is being recorded, and a recording will be posted afterwards, so please look for an email with that information. One thing for actually all of the speakers is listening to the presentations, particularly on the meat side, food inflation is kind of coming back probably fiercely this year after being relatively flat to even having deflation in recent years. So particularly on the meat side, so I would think that would be a pretty good opportunity for those alternative proteins, which typically, when they were introduced, were always at typically a higher price than beef products. So any comments on how any of the speakers think that will play out over the next 6 to 9 months?
Yeah, Brian, this is Mike Shaw. I think we're going to see a number of issues play out. Clearly, with meat being constrained, animal agriculture in general being constrained, obviously there's going to be the demand, and we're probably going to see prices rise significantly. Retailers are not rationing it yet. I know Costco had, for a moment, for some period of time, limited the amount of meat that shoppers could purchase, their members could purchase, but we haven't seen that. I think we're kind of doing this like we're opening up the country. The retailers and the shoppers are kind of left on their own to do their own behaviors, but that are going to suffer from price increases, if for no other reason than because the supply chain, not specifically production, but supply chain, is going to become more constrained.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that's something that we will all definitely be following. And another question, actually, for you is as far as I know, you spoke about the dry powder that was out there kind of before the pandemic. A lot of large food companies were buying innovation, basically, is the way I called it. Whether it's someone like a Hershey looking at meat snacks or things like that. Do you see that continuing, in the future, or do you think they'll be looking for more safe spots based on that? But also, and then thinking too on the accounting side, perhaps larger companies are taking advantage of some of those incentives that are out there.
Well, that's a good question, Brian. And the way I look at this is there are classes of investors out there. Obviously, you have the large big food strategics that can compete very aggressively in valuation because of synergy. You have private equity, family office platforms, and even as the plant-based industry continues its meteoric rise, you're seeing impact firms, impact funds, family offices. Our friends at the Good Food Institute are monitoring this space very, very carefully. So yes, I see very opportunistic times for big food where large enough distribution can make an impact and offset perhaps some of the challenges they're having in alternate channels like food service. I also see very small, nimble, innovative companies in all categories that will find the capital and be able to leverage the synergy with strategic private equity, food and/or agriculture platforms that may just be too small or not aligned culturally with big food at that stage in their growth. So it runs the gamut.
Not only that, I'll just add, this is Jeff. There's a lot of big food companies who are actually developing their own private equity brands, or maybe better said, their own venture capital arms to invest in those smaller category brands that allow them to leverage off what they're doing by having board seats or just taking more of a bigger ownership without having to integrate them entirely into their own existing food operations. So big food is looking at the entire environment a lot differently than they have in the past, recognizing that the organic growth has kind of topped out at a very 1 or 2 or 3% rate, and they're looking for other channels of growth. And the way they view this is using the leverage of their dollars at an investable piece to capture some of that innovation by investing directly in those companies.
Jeff, let me just follow up on that. This is Mike Shaw again. It's not just big food, it's big retail. And I dare say that over the last 20 years in the natural foods industry with what Whole Foods Market began in the form of local producer loans or investments in companies to help them grow and scale is now being replicated. It's being replicated by Kroger. It's being replicated by Safeway Albertsons. It's being replicated by most of the major retailers, so they can deploy their leverageable assets and help those companies grow. They're very discreet, obviously, because perhaps someone that Kroger is interested in may not be as attractive to being a winner at Safeway, Albertsons, or Whole Foods. But that notwithstanding, big retailers see the light. They have a supply chain. They understand timing and merchandising strategies, as I alluded to earlier, whether it's a performance category or it's a maintenance category. And they have a lot of clout now with funds and or private equity partners that are bringing ideas to them.
Well, it's so true because, Amazon and Whole Foods is in a very unique position with the relationship with United Natural Foods, too, because they're using predictive analytics to understand what the behaviors and the purchasing habits of consumers are and how to leverage those into their buying strategies and putting X, Y, and Z on their shelves. And Amazon, in and of itself, when they're doing direct-to-consumer sales, are able to use the entire environment of what's available through Amazon to help them understand what goes on the shelves of Whole Foods.
Well, that's true. I'd also like to say that Focal Point did work on a project last year that I looked at in another role that was a completely digitally native brand. And that's something I think we need to be mindful of, are brands that are emerging and being very, very successful in e-commerce with a model that wasn't really or could not have been sustainable in a few short years ago or even a year ago. And we're seeing that in brands that are both shelf stable and, as I also have alluded to, meeting the consumer where they are. So we're seeing meal kit companies, meal solution companies that are direct to consumer having explosive growth, very, very efficient consumer acquisition cost or CAC, and values for those consumers that long-term values that were unheard of a year ago. So it's not just Amazon and predictive analytics. There are a lot of industry partners out there. The intellectual power it spins is just not to be discounted. With not just rearview mirror analytics of market share data and conventional data that are measured in syndicated research, but predictive insights. So it's Amazon, it spins in a whole host of companies out there in this new world order that are going to fuel innovation that Babak had so articulately shared.
Yep.
Very good. And anything to add to that, Babak?
No, I mean, what we're saying is it's innovation is what gets you out of this area, and so you have the option of going with reduced margins or innovate to come up with new products. And as you see, the retailers and the grocery stores and the big food sellers are always looking for new brands and new products. So it's innovation. It works. It truly does, and the numbers show it. So that's all. Thank you.
Yeah. Brian, it looks like we've got on how the companies survive in this climate.
Right. Yes, I was just going to bring that up, so it's perfect segue. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I can take a swing at that, but I'd certainly love to hear Jeff and Babak chime in here. But I think the watchword there is focus. And I take that out of a playbook when Whole Foods Market has 11 regions, 11 region presidents, 11 buying arms, as well as a global procurement system. It's what, global grocery and global perishables, and based in Austin. And I would say that the biggest challenge for small to medium-sized companies is they really want to try to do too much too fast. It's an age-old problem, and I think by prioritizing and staying laser-like focused on product, on message, and chain and customer obsession is going to be the key to success in the future. You just can't do everything with everyone. And in some cases, I've encouraged small to medium size, and I'm saying from 2 million to 200 million in revenue, to stay focused. And I know from this question, it's probably the under 10 million revenue companies, but stay highly focused and make certain that the fundamental operating metrics, the gross profit margins, if it's a digitally commerce-oriented company, that your performance marketing is focused, that your product message and packaging is focused, and obviously quality and a point of difference that consumers, whether they're e-com or brick and mortar, are going to recognize.
Very good. Anyone want to add to that?
I think the idea of focus is a fantastic thought here, and I'm saying it here with many of our clients at the same time. The focus is extremely important, and it helps them with when they're trying to develop a patent portfolio, or when they're trying to manage an existing trademark portfolio, or when they're trying to decide which areas to seek protection in. And the things that are not aligned with the business, those are the things that can be pruned, so you can dedicate the resources to things that are going to be protecting you into the future.
I agree with all of that. This is Jeff, and the one thing I might add is that my own experience is that many of the companies and many of the consumers today place a high value of integrity and trust in the brands that they're buying. And so creating that value proposition around trust and integrity of product is very important, perhaps even more so today than it was just a few years ago.
Thank you. Another question that did come in is, would increased antitrust enforcement against meat companies solve similar meat supply chain issues moving forward? I know this isn't the first time we've had antitrust complaints against meat companies, but anyone care to respond to that?
I'll take a swig at that here. As a patent attorney, we're always thinking about the other side of things, because on one hand, as a patent attorney, you want to have this beautiful exclusive rights to keep people out of it. Yet at the same time, there's this issue of antitrust and this oligopolistic behavior that we're seeing. We're seeing, I think there was Senator Hawley of Missouri and Senator Baldwin of Wisconsin have asked the FTC to open an antitrust investigation into the meat packing industry. And I think the concern that they are having is we have a small group of large packers, and that can impact the suppliers and people upstream and people downstream. So again, we have a system that's under stress, and people are trying to figure out where the points are. And if the results of this investigation cause us to have less of a consolidated number of facilities and more distribution and a more robust supply chain, then I think that would be a good solution in this case.
Yeah, very good. Another question, and this is one I've heard before, but maybe anyone feel free to address, is how do you approach investors to raise capital in these uncertain times? These are probably much more uncertain times than ever before.
Well, Brian, I'll take this one. I've the last 8 or 9 years at Whole Foods Market, and having the last 3 or 4 specifically go through and review hundreds and hundreds of plans and speak to people, I'd say that being focused on a consumer need is crucial. It's absolutely vital that the product have a very compelling reason for being. And I know that sounds pretty benign or standard operating procedure, but a lot of people lose sight of that. And in doing so, I've also noticed the other adage is people invest in, and investors invest in people. in addition to a good idea. So surrounding that idea, that compelling consumer difference or problem-solving solution in a brand requires people that have been experienced or proven and or have had some experience and success, and in some cases experience in failure. That's equally as valuable a lesson when bringing a product to market and gaining investor confidence. And then a path forward. I think a vision for where the product and the brand could ultimately exist in any channel, whether that's brick and mortar grocery, e-com, food service, prepared foods in store. There has to be a path to success. And then lastly, having thought of the unanticipated consequences of the business plan and making sure that we've thought of somewhat of the unthinkable.
Oh, very helpful, yes. One other question for Jeff, actually, in your presentation, you talked about going back and checking research and credits. Could you go into a little more detail about how companies might go about doing that? Checking for larger companies, they may have the ability to do so, but for smaller and mid-sized companies, how could they take advantage of that opportunity?
Well, the best thing to do, of course, is to ask Markham, and I'm just kind of tongue-in-cheek there, but the best thing to do is sit down with someone who knows the law very well and to have a discussion about the types of activities and the types of the costs are associated with those activities that have led to what would otherwise qualify as research and development activities. And once we have a handle on what that looks like, we can go through various artificial intelligence to capture the costs related to those activities. We can actually screen your Outlook inbox and your messaging to try and uncover the types of time that went into those activities, uncover the costs that went into them, and then capture them, document them, and then take advantage of those credits. So, working with a trusted advisor who knows the law, number one, knows the industry, number two, and then can ask the right questions that leads to capturing those costs is really the best way to do it. And you can go back in time to do that as long as the records are there to identify the types of activities that lead to those types of credits and costs.
Okay, thank you. Very helpful. We're coming to a close, but I just want to give everyone an opportunity. If you could give one closing statement, one big takeaway that everybody should walk away from this webinar with, feel free, and I'll start with Mike. We'll go in the same order.
Well, thanks. And I think this is an extraordinary time in modern history to serve a very noble effort in feeding the food, feeding our shoppers and our consumers, and serving our population, not only in the U.S. but globally, in a noble and fulfilling and sustainable way. I'm the token vegan in the group, so I'm a strong believer. I'm placing bets on the future of plant-based foods. Animal agriculture is going to be challenged. It's having a reckoning, and we should be mindful. We should be mindful of one another's needs, and certainly mindful of how we may be able to serve others, and particularly Bob and myself, Bob Woolway and I at Focal Point. We believe our core values and our approach to helping food entrepreneurs and big food and private equity and our friends at Markham and Kilpatrick, Jeff and Babak, it would be an honor. So move forward mindfully with intention.
Thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, sure. I didn't have any lasting thoughts other than, we're here to help. These are challenging times, and as you come across those challenges, if you have issues that you want help with, we think more about trying to help our clients and help those that just need help, and we're here to do that for you. And I just want to thank the rest of the panel members and our partners in putting this presentation on. And the one thing I would leave you with is there's more topics you'd like us to address, we'd be happy to put on another webinar. So send comments if you could and let us know what those are, and we can address those as well.
Yeah, that would be a pleasure, Jeff. Thank you.
Very good.
And thank you very much also, Jeff and Mike and Brian and Lou for this excellent presentation, excellent topic. As we know, food is extremely important, and now we're facing a massive disruption. And we also know that we always come up with solutions, and when those solutions are highly innovative, then they lead to profits for all of us. And we should protect those innovations when they rise to the level of inventiveness or brand protection. As Jeff mentioned, brands convey feeling and security and integrity to the consumers, and we should be fortunate to be in a position to aid our clients maintain focus. Thank you very much for this excellent opportunity. I look forward to working with all of us again. Thank you.
Okay. And then thank you, Babak and Jeff and Mike as well, and for a very informative hour-long presentation. And please look forward to Markham's next webinars on this front. And thank you very much to Kilpatrick, Townsend, and Markham and Focal Point for today's presentation. Have a nice day and stay in touch.